right, we are live. This is Chris, Infinite Realities, and I am here with not one of only my favorite creators, but one of Jamie's favorite creators, one of my wife Tiffany's favorite creators, Mr. Terry Moore. How are you today?
I'm doing good. I'm glad to be here. Really and truly, I'm glad to be here.
Well, Lord knows we appreciate it. What have you been up to these last few weeks?
I have spent the last few weeks right here.
Huh?
Yeah, and what I did was I did a lot of sketches, and then I finished up my my book, my series, 5 years.
Okay.
So I did while we've been in self-isolation. I did issue 9 and 10, and got that thing finished. And it was kind of easy because I can't go anywhere, so I just binge worked.
See, that's good. It's better than binge watching. That's what a lot of folks are doing.
Yeah, I've been binge watched a lot. Over the years when I was inking, I put on a series, and I've gone through all the different series.
Well, do you mind? I know you probably talk about it to death, but a lot of folks were excited to talk to the man behind Strangers in Paradise. Since we announced you, have been getting lots of messages. Do you mind starting just the genesis of that comic? Where did that come from for you?
My answer starts when I was 11.
Yeah?
Yeah, I mean, it just goes way, way back. When I was a boy, I loved to read. And I was living with my parents in Africa. My dad was over there doing some work, for the government in Dar es Salaam. And in Dar es Salaam, I was exposed to all these English books, what the English kids read for YA, And so for some reason, I found two different authors the same year when I was 10 and 11. I found Ian Fleming. I read all the James Bond books when I was 11 in one summer. And then I found Enid Blyton, who was writing YA fiction for English kids in World War II, post-World War II. It's very old-fashioned, like it'd be on PBS, And she wrote a series of 6 books called, Mallory Towers. And it was about these girls, this class of girls that went through 6 years of school at a boarding school. So it was them as freshmen to seniors, right? Like 6th grade to 12th grade. And they had all the different characters that I basically pull from now, which was, the naive, sweet girl, the cheeky, troublemaker girl who needs a friend, the artist girl, all these other types. So I loved both those books. I was fascinated by them, even though, it wasn't a boys' boarding school, it was a girls', but I was a captive reader. There's not much else to do in Africa but read. And cut forward to in my 30s, I want to start drawing for a career. And I'm drawing all kinds of stuff, trying to get a comic strip. None of it's working because I idolize comic strip cartoonists too much, so everything was derivative. I couldn't get an original thought. And I put it all aside one day, and I just looked at any original idea I have. And everything I saw in my comic strips, the only original ideas I had was basically a Francine character, a Kachu character, and a David character. And I really just kind of took these 3 characters and started the Strangers in Paradise idea. And it was really just a girls' boarding school meets James Bond was the approach to the series. I wanted to write about girls that I found fascinating because I didn't want to obsess over guys. I wanted to obsess. If I had to obsess something, I wanted to obsess about women. But I wanted it to be readable for guys. I didn't want them to sit around and talk about what women really talk about. I wanted them to sit around and talk about so-and-so got shot, we got to do something.
Right.
That kind of thing, a comic book story. So that's what it is in a nutshell. It's, if you dug into me as a psychiatrist, there you go, all the way back to 11. And then add on every influence I've ever had reading a comic book. And, the rest is your details, But that's it in a nutshell. I wanted to write about women that I could care about and grow to like and be with for a long time. but I wanted them to do exciting things that were almost James Bond-like. So that explains Kachu's criminal past and people wanting to get her, and the drama that comes from that throughout the entire series. Versus Francine, who is really just kind of keeping the home fires burning and trying to hang on and be loyal until all this trouble pulls her out, and she goes and saves Kachu. Spoilers.
What's cool about that is I remember when I first got hooked on it. I was in college. A friend of mine he brought, I think, the first 5 trades over to our apartment, and it really was a case of, hey, stop what you're doing right now and read this. I'm going to come back in a couple of days and we're going to talk about it. And what was crazy about it, it hooks you with these very real characters, these very strong characters, and you're invested in their relationship. And then the crime stuff starts slowly building. It's not there immediately, but by the time it does get there, it's a late hook, and it was so organic.
It's organic because we take the time. And I had this belief when I started that this was my ride for life. I was going to do this until I was 95, that one story. So I felt like I had time to build and slowly develop because that was the tone of everything back then. The Cerebus was a slow burn. Bone took time to develop. And all those books that I was influenced by in the indie market, they were all slow burns,
Right.
And then the guys who were in mainstream, we would ask them for advice, and they would say, make every issue be able to stand on its own. None of us took that advice. No. We all just wrote as if, boy, if you didn't read issues 1 through 13, you got no idea what 14 is. And we didn't care. We just kind of did it. And that was just kind of the way we did it.
Well, I remember, again, and I'm hearkening back here, one thing that stands out is these female characters. I remember at the time people shocked that a man was writing these characters.
Yeah.
Because every woman had urgency, and I we still get that from time to time from new readers who are picking up collections. They're like, well, I went and Googled who this Terry Moore was, and I thought I was getting the wrong person.
Who's this guy?
Right. So I guess, what is your approach with that? How do you write strong women with urgency so deftly? What is your process when approaching that?
Well, I grew up with women in the house, of course, and I always take it from the standpoint of write the human being first, and then put their identity on top of that. So it's like I always went from the standpoint of we all have the same emotional range, and a lot of us have the same triggers. We can get hurt the same way. We can be complimented the same way. So I look for that commonality that we all have, and I'd write from that point first, primarily. So I think that's helped me navigate through what could have been tricky if you are identifying by everybody by what you see. Very few people want to be identified by what you see is what you get. Most of us say there's more in here. So as a writer, you go there and write from that point. So the conversations come from the heart and the mind, like that. I really feel like I could get Francine and Kachu to stand in a junkyard and argue over an old Ford pickup part and get the conversation to be as if it was, 2 guys working in a motor shop, So I just feel that freedom to do that, to write that way and put these characters in any situation and make it work out. And sometimes if you can get them in the most unusual setting, that's the most interesting stuff to read, So I actually feel like it's been to my benefit to be able to look at this from a perspective where I'm not as bound to reality as some people might be trying to write.
Mm-hmm.
I use my imagination, but I try to do it with respect. respect.
We're getting lots of comments in the feed here. One that stands out, Erica Bonilla says, Francine and Kachu were an influence of mine in college. Their friendship was really so real as a reader, and the story is amazing.
Thank you. Thank you.
And that's a common sentiment there. One thing that I noticed is that not only do they feel real, but we can feel your affection for these characters.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you never pull a punch with these characters. No one ever feels safe. No one ever feels they're above. So, as a reader, I'm fascinated by that. You can sense the love, but they're going to go through it.
Yeah. And that's like it's like if you and I had seen each other every day for 20 years, we're best pals. Imagine all the stuff I've seen you go through.
Mm-hmm.
You know, all right, and vice versa. You've been there every day. You know, you're the first phone call. So I want it to be like that in the story. That in a lot of stories, say you're writing a sitcom, and the door opens, people walk into the room, you have the scene. Say the parents come over to visit the young couple. It starts when they arrive. It stops when they leave. There's a few quips after they leave, and then the scene's over. I like to get there early and stay late is how I approach my writing. So I want to be with Francine and Kachu longer in the beginning of a scene so that you can really see more setup, give them time to talk and let you know exactly where their headspace is. Let the normal scene happen the way it might normally be written, and then stay in the room after everybody leaves and see what they really say so that we can really see what they think. And I think that by letting the reader stay in the room after everybody leaves, you get even closer to the character, because the more you know, the more you care. So the character can bluff their way through a scene, be brave or happy, whatever. When the door closes and you stay with the character long enough, you can see what they really think. And that makes a big difference in bonding with the character, you know.
I've never thought about that, but yeah, I'm thinking back at the body, and now I see it. Did you always intend to revisit them? Because there was a break in Strangers, and you came back. Was that always your intent to come back?
Yeah, I had always hoped to come back because, you know, my fondness for that particular story is real. We stopped in 2007. I did other series. We were looking forward to the anniversaries, and each one looking for an opportunity to celebrate it correctly. And when we hit the 25th one, I had completed, you know, Echo, Motor Girl, Rachel Rising, and I felt like I had earned the right to be able to come back to Strangers in Paradise fresh and make the story very now, you know, update it so that the characters, my fear was that the characters would be trapped back in the 90s.
Right.
Like an old TV show. And I didn't want that. I wanted to bring them back and let people see they're still cooler than us today, you know. I took a lot of joy in that.
Was there any having to get used to them again? Was there any having to find their voices, or was it, to your point, revisiting old friends where you pick up where the conversation left off?
It was not a matter of having to come back and get warm to it again, because I had been drawing them every day anyway. Kachu is my number one sketch request at every time I poke my head out the door. And so Kachu and Francine have been with me every day anyway. What was fun was thinking of, I had gotten so used to thinking of them as being retired and happy.
Yeah.
And, you know, they're done with adventuring. But to think about how to pull them into this big one story that I had started developing through the other series and get them involved, it really kind of made me uncomfortable, like a parent figure, like, oh man, you guys need to stay away from that trouble stuff. Because what's going on with Echo and Rachel and all that, that's bad stuff. Don't go over there. But I mean, it was time. So, and I'm glad we did.
Well, this leads me into a question I wanted to ask, and I'm going to let Jamie Lee Shreve says, I've always appreciated the art. Terry draws people, especially women, so differently than a lot of other comics. I love the real bodies. They have real bodies. And you mentioned Ketchu's your number one request. Next I see you, I'm going to get me a Francine because I've always been a Francine guy. But yeah, you draw real women. That has to be by design, right?
Well, it's because I love real women. It's my way of adoring the women on this planet. I don't see much of that anymore. When I was younger, I saw more open adoration of women, just appreciation that was just heartfelt. I see that pulling back as we're all being very careful what we say. Like I saw the article this week about Adele lost a lot of weight. Are we allowed to say anything about it? You know, so it's a tricky time. You don't know what to say that's appropriate or inappropriate. What I can do is keep my mouth shut and just draw Francine and Kachu as realistically as possible to show that if you feel, 30 pounds overweight, everybody thinks you're beautiful. That's not the problem you think it is, Or if you're Kachu and you feel like you're dragging your past and everybody looks at you like a suspect, that's, no, we love you for your personality and your loyalty and to Francine and, stuff like that. So the baggage people think they bring to women or how they draw them or whatever. And especially what I really reject in my art is the idealization, where if you're drawing women with wasp waists and, overblown sex areas and things like that, that's disrespectful to the entire, female culture. It's not that it's not that people are rejecting being able to feel comfortable and sexy in their bodies. They just don't want anybody ridiculing it and basing it down to a cartoon, So when I'm drawing these characters, I wanted to make them, I switched from a cartooning style to more like drawing over my head, trying very hard to draw as real as I could, but simply in a European way, so that I could show that all these different body types in the story, they're all wonderful women. We adore them all. So that was my approach as an artist. My affection for the women is obvious. I've been very open about the fact that I draw women because the artist has to obsess over that body to get it right. And I didn't want to draw a superhero guy and have to draw his butt every day for the rest of my life and obsess over exactly how his gluteus maximus was shaped. I don't want to draw Batman's butt every day for the rest of my life. But if I have to draw Francine, I'm happy. So, you can tell on the one hand, I'm just a guy who likes women. But on the other hand, I feel this big responsibility not to ruin that on a public stage, to be respectful and show that this can be done correctly, that we can make a story that men and women like to read both, and nobody's getting pissed off because it's inappropriate, And when you think about it, in the 90s, when I started, it was a free-for-all. You could do whatever you wanted.
Yep.
Everybody, men and women are in thongs. I was still the same way. I rejected that. And here we are in a very careful time. And it still works. So hopefully there's some sort of common denominator there. I think the common denominator is probably respect for what you're writing and drawing. Have respect for it. Otherwise, you're going to get in trouble.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. And I think I could boil it down more. You write and draw people.
Yeah.
Human beings. all the things that make human beings great, all the things that make them not so great. And I think the gender at that point is secondary because you're just writing
Exactly.
people.
Exactly. Thank you. You said that like a journalist.
I was in a former life, so
There you go. Very succinct. I love a beautiful mind. Mine just wanders around the garden.
I'm gonna hold on to that, and I'm gonna share it with my partners Brandon and Jamie next time they think I've said something ridiculous. One thing I love also is that you deal with a broad spectrum of issues: sexuality. You deal with mental health issues. With Motor Girl, it's about a Marine with PTSD. You deal with sense of the changing scape of one's own identity. Why? That sounds like a very. Where does like? How do you juggle those things? Because again, I feel like the way you handle women, it never feels sensationalized. It never feels like, and now here's the PTSD issue. Now here's the sexuality issue. How do you approach those issues with your characters?
I think that those stories come to me in an honest way. I hope, because like when I first started the very first little 3-issue miniseries of Stranger in Paradise, all I cared about was the triangle. And then there was a 9-month period before I started the regular series, Stranger in Paradise #1, self-published. In that 9-month period, I learned that my cousin, Ben, who was gay from Arkansas, he had moved to San Francisco, and he had become a casualty of AIDS. And I was heartbroken because I loved my first cousin, Ben. And I was thinking about how unfair it was and the fact that he had to die out there without any of us there to comfort him. And after processing all that, I was thinking about my story with Francine and Kachu, and how Kachu, in her previous life as a sex worker, that had to be an issue.
Mm-hmm.
And pulling that story, the inspiration, that's where the inspiration came for Kachu. Now had a very close friend who was dealing with the same problem. And that just kind of started the ball rolling, where I realized I was going to reflect my time. You know, when I started back in the 90s, early 90s, AIDS was still a problem, an issue. And then it was consumerism, and then it was, the housing crash, and then the stock market crash. And then, it was just always something like that. And I had always been interested in crime stories. I read all the detective and thriller stuff. So writing all the criminal stuff and the Big Six and Darcy Parker, I was so inspired by things that my exposure to either stories or certain people. When I was a TV editor, once in a blue moon, I got to be in the room with somebody who was on the Forbes list, and, the rich. And it was like they lived on a different planet. There was nothing you could say that would ever interest them. Completely unapproachable as a human being. And that inspired me to write Darcy Parker. She walks into a private hotel. Everybody's beneath, everybody's her servant. So I just pulled from life. When I finished Stranger in Paradise, that big long run in 2007, all I was reading about by that point was science. And I had been reading a lot about atomic development and Oppenheimer's story, and Einstein's frustrations, why he couldn't get his theories that he based on regular math to coincide with everything people were coming up with in the quantum math. It was tremendously frustrating to him. And at the same time, okay, here's one more element. And then I'll stop.
No, you talking. Any element you want to introduce, the floor is yours.
One of the reasons why it started in Echo, that whole story with the fee, is because halfway through Strangers in Paradise, I burned out.
Oh,
Suddenly, my drawing was just, I couldn't draw correctly. It was just, everything looked ugly to me. And I thought, I can't do this. I can't take a year off and recharge. I have got to be reliably good at art every day. So, because I'm on a deadline, you're waiting for my next issue. And what I did was I started researching the great artists of the past and went deeper into their stories and realized that they were not just running off of raw talent. They had reliable measures that they used, and it took me to the phi ratio, the PHI, the phi ratio. So like Leonardo da Vinci, when you see like the Last Supper, that's all divided up into segments. The Christ is in exactly the right place. Judas is in the right place. Paul's in the right place, where your eye goes first, second, and third, and then the window is the pyramid, and all. That's all by mathematical design. It's not an accident. It's not an inspiration of talent. They knew what they were doing. You go to Vermeer or, well, anybody except Van Gogh, who was just like on a whim. But so I needed to learn the reliability, and reading all about that, it takes you into the science of phi, which is fun, but I don't know what you do with it. Higher mathematics likes to look at it, but they get bored with it real fast. I didn't get bored with it. So when it was time to finish SIP and start new stories, Echo, I thought, I'll take what I've learned with the phi mathematics and I'll put it towards Einstein's frustrations and put it in a quantum world where everything is malleable and in and out. And then I'll put it all on this loser girl in the wood, in the park ranger woods of California, right next to the Nevada desert. And then I'll just mash it up, like a music style. It'll be a mashup. And then I'll just run with it, and it'll be a fugitive story. She gets this weird metal stuff and runs, and they chase her. And I was very inspired, So that was just a product of my time. I did not have that idea 10 years earlier. I couldn't have done it 10 years earlier. And then the last few years, the world's gone to hell in a handbasket, and I just kind of write about it. Rachel was about where's it all going? What's the point?
Yep.
And then I also, in Rachel, I got to turn the predator situation upside down. I'm so tired I read about all the serial killers.
Yeah.
And they all look like serial killers. And I'm tired of that. I wish, first off, I just wish every one of them would be met with a shotgun on his first attempt. But so I came up with this theory that predators go from victim to victim until they find the wrong one that stops them.
Right. I
wanted to write a story where that happened. But I also wanted it to be like in this little town, if you saw everybody in town and you think, okay, that guy must be the serial killer.
Yeah.
I wanted him to be the sweetest man in town. And that's the big undertaker, Earl. And the least likely suspect is the serial killer.
Yeah.
And I just had fun with that. And I came up with these characters that just charmed me to no end,
Rachel,
that's how it happens. It's
so cool.
You see how it works? It's just too much crap going on in here. And it just all kind of funnels out.
Listen, we're coming up to the end of our 30 minutes together. The thing that I wanted to say more than anything is I hate Darcy Parker so much.
She hates you too, man. She hates you too.
Oh, God. That was one of those, every time she showed up, I was like, I hate you, Darcy Parker. You're the worst.
Bitch.
It was. Like, I'm legit, shaking my fist in anger at a comic book whenever she shows up.
Oh, so, she just didn't care. It's like
at all.
Attitude.
The worst. So hearing the genesis of her, I'm like, yeah, well, of course that's where she came from.
Yeah. They're out there, man.
Yeah, they are. Well, listen, you got Strangers in Paradise. Folks, if all you've read is Strangers, Rachel Rising is great. Echo is great. Motor Girl is great. You've got work all over the place. What can people do for you right now? How can fans of Terry Moore, what can they do to support you right now?
Please just follow me on the social media of your choice, and buy my book the next time it hits in Infinite Realities, and or wherever your local comic shop is. Um, I really rely on the first line of buyers for my book is the comic shops. So shops like Infinite Realities, and then my local shop in Houston, Bedrock. These are my first wave of buyers, and then the second wave is the individuals. So the individuals, if they can go to the local comic shops and support them, that keeps us all healthy. It keeps me in business. If I lost the comic shops, it would be so. I'd just be on a street corner handing out pamphlets. So yeah, support the comic shop ecosystem. The way it works, it's really good. That's the best way to support us.
Well, you're all here. If you're watching this, you're already a fan of his work. If you know somebody who's on the fence about trying a comic, give them a Terry Moore comic.
Yeah, please, that'd be great.
So, Terry, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's
Go
been
ahead.
a pleasure, Chris.
Thank you. The feeling is mutual.